Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Gateway Office Hours. It's Friday. Thank God. It's been quite the week. We're very excited, but you're here today because we're going to help you get to the next level with your startup. And I have one of our favorite mentors and just gentlemen in the industry, Sebo Shen. Some people call him the Vape God. He's the co-founder and CEO of Vape Exhale, which is much of the industry's favorite vaporizing device.
Thank you. Please refer to me as Vape God. I like that.
I think you have Eric Frodel to thank for that one.
Yeah, I think there's only 2 people in the industry that call me that, but that's 2 more than I expected. So I'm happy with it.
We're live here with Sebo. If you have any questions you would like to ask him, just hit him up on the Facebook comments or tweet at us, and Michael or Princessa will make sure that we answer them. Otherwise, we're going to jump right in and start talking about your journey and kind of some advice that you have for founders. But what you all might notice is that Carter is not here today. I just want to send a very warm congratulations to Carter and Diane, who are tying the knot today. So great job, guys. Super happy. I'm going to see you later this afternoon as soon as I get my job done here. Enjoy the day off.
Maybe even a wedding gift might show up.
There you go. Yeah. All right, Sebo.
Yes, Ben.
I mean, if anyone out here doesn't know you, I would say that they're probably not in the industry.
Really?
Is that fair? I mean,
I wouldn't go that far, but I appreciate the compliment. Yes.
So you created the Vape Exhale, but that's not always what you were doing. You've had this entire past. You ended up in the cannabis industry, like most of our guests. I'd like to kind of just unpack that a little bit and make sure that we understand who Sebo is as a person, and then we'll talk about the cannabis journey, if that sounds good with you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So me as a person, well, there's many facets. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm an entrepreneur, Canadad. Yeah. That's maybe one of my most proudest things. But I guess a good way to explain is the way I got into the cannabis industry, which was I've always been a health-conscious individual. Mm-hmm. I always was on the smaller side, so I was always looking for various advantages in sports, whether it was being faster or trying to work out harder or longer than the competition.
And not just any sports, like impact sports, and you were a stuntman at one point.
Correct.
And you're into capoeira.
Yes.
Or how do you say it?
Capoeira, you said it right.
Capoeira.
Yep.
You got to put a little inflection in there.
You do need a little bit of that, yeah.
Okay.
Then they know you're not a gringo.
Yeah, and jiu-jitsu.
And jiu-jitsu.
Which you're medaled and you're competing and
yes.
Still.
I'm still competing, correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
And despite the looks, Sebo is actually into your 40s now?
I'll be 41 this year.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
wow,
so,
you look great.
Thank you.
And
I
maybe it's that healthy lifestyle.
I think it is the healthy lifestyle, and just to go back, so I was extremely physically active, and through the stunt work, which is how I paid the bills in college, I accumulated a bunch of injuries. My agent had started giving me stronger and stronger pain medications, first Vicodin, then Percocet, and I was taking anywhere from 4 to 8 a day.
Wow.
Started suffering these huge ulcers in my stomach, wondering why I had stomach aches, and went online and realized, all the painkillers.
I'm bleeding internally.
Yeah, exactly. So my roommate, who to this day, I always say if he stuck with the entertainment industry, probably would have become like the next Brad Pitt or George Clooney.
Wow.
He was an everyday cannabis consumer. He was a 6'2" British guy, and he could do all the flips that I could do. So he was like me, but taller, better looking, and had a British accent. So he kind of had all the pieces that you would need to be like a really great action star, except he smoked cannabis every single day. He missed every single audition other than when he needed money.
Oh, no.
So I got this really bad idea of like cannabis would stunt your progression.
Okay.
And then finally one day, after complaining about my stomach hurting for like 2 months straight, he's like, Sebo, just try this. Just one puff. If you don't like it, I won't ever bother you again.
Okay.
And I tried it. The pain went away. And even more so than that was that I started having like these deeper thoughts, and most of it was just self-reflection, like how I would behave, how I would carry myself, how I would always try to be like the most intellectually superior person in the room, mostly because I was the smallest guy in the room.
Right.
But it gave me all this like self-awareness that, after the first inhalation, I immediately knew that this was something that was going to be a part of my life, probably for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But I was also had extreme guilt about liking cannabis. I grew up in the Reagan era where
just say no.
Yeah. You know, you want your brain to be a fried egg in a pan. You know, I didn't want that. But as I started consuming cannabis, I started understanding like this was just really different than what we were told. And that kind of, you know, sparked the first phase of me questioning everything. Up until that time, it was like just listening to my dad, like study hard, you know, work hard, be a good Asian boy.
That's amazing. You went from on opioid drugs and just a complete stigmatized view of cannabis to replacing the drugs and understanding cannabis like in a very short amount of time.
Yes.
And it was that quick for you.
Yes. I mean, it was one of those things, I think, when you finally get to experience something versus just reading about it or learning about it theoretically, you know, you can make up the decision for yourself. And for myself, I was like, you know, I don't feel like jumping off a building. You know, I don't feel like being violent. All I do feel like is eating a little bit more and laughing with my friends. And I was just thinking that if this is a gateway drug, then it seems like it's a gateway into awesomeness.
I like that. But you didn't go immediately. It wasn't like after that you got into the cannabis industry and got behind it fully. Like you lived a very kind of, I mean, your Asian father was probably very proud of the trajectory you started to take. You graduated from UCLA.
Yes.
You went into tech and sales and did pretty well. What, like Salesforce and Yammer, like, you know, just talk about that part of the career.
Absolutely. So, after graduating college, I worked as a stuntman for a short while. After I realized that, the actors are the ones that get paid, not the stuntmen. I had no desire to be an entertainer. So, I had to figure out what I wanted to do. I was an ethnic studies major, also studied sociology, worked at a social worker for a little while. Then I realized, if I ever want to afford a house in the Bay Area, I'm going to need a social worker helping me. So I begged and pleaded into my first sales role at a company called Jigsaw, which Salesforce did acquire. That was in 2003. And then from 2003 to 2013, I worked for 5 different companies. All of them had successful exits. Some went IPO, some were acquired by LinkedIn or Microsoft. But in that time, I had just been collecting vaporizers. You know, my wife, she'll tell you, I have over 150 of them in our garage. And I was just obsessed with, so the reason why I had so many was being a sales guy in a high-tech company, it's extremely stressful. You could be the top sales guy one quarter, and if you don't make your number the next quarter, you could be out of a job. And that has actually, I've seen that happen to people, and I was always, I was always the top sales guy at the companies I worked for, and I would never even allow myself to get into second place. And what I realized was I actually wasn't a daily smoker in college. I would smoke on the weekends, but when I started working, I became a daily smoker, and I realized I was just self-medicating. I had always thought that I was just someone that consumed cannabis to enrich his life. I wasn't a patient, but in retrospect, looking back, I mean, I was super stressed, you know, just thinking that once the quarter ends, you have your job, then you have 90 more days to keep your job again. I mean,
that's sales for you.
Yeah, there's just like a couple days of like feeling good, then it's back on the grind. And that's when I realized like I was medicating. I mean, there was a correlation between how well I was doing professionally and how much cannabis I was consuming. And ultimately, after the 5th company, you know, my wife was like, "You don't seem excited about the IPO," and I wasn't, other than the bank account growing. And that's when I realized, like, all right, I'm 35 years old. I've been through this 5 times. Everyone's doing backflips except for me. I got to find something else to do with my life. And my wife was like, well, seems pretty obvious. You love vaporizers. You love cannabis.
Wow.
Just go make one. And
so we have your wife to thank.
Yeah. And she didn't even smoke cannabis at that point.
Yeah. So, okay, I want to rewind just a little bit because you said you started purchasing vaporizers in 2003. And was it at that point that you started kind of paying attention and trying to like find the best one, or was it just kind of just like a hobby of yours? Like, I want to try to figure out where this journey into the vape sales started. And you know, I'm always pushing our founders to do competitive analysis and become a master of their domain, which is something I've always admired about you. I don't know anyone that knows vaporizers as well as you do. And when did that kind of start changing, when you're like, oh, I could actually build a better one?
Yeah, so I actually bought my first vape in 2000, and that was the BC vape.
So 17 years ago, people.
17 years ago, 17 years ago. And it was literally a soldering iron with an upside down fishbowl on top, and it probably looked less healthy than smoking. And okay, so from 2000 to 2010, you know me. When I like something, I try to evangelize it. So I was really trying to get all of my friends to convert from smoking to combusting. I mean, smoking to vaporization.
Yeah.
And they would always come over to my house and use my vaporizers. But when they went home, I mean, none of them ever bought a vaporizers.
Sure.
So I started just asking them, why? Like, we're getting older. We're almost 30. Like, why do you want to keep smoking when I've known of this other option for such a long time? And ultimately what they told me was, vaping, it's just not as fun. It doesn't get you as medicated or as high. It kind of has like that burnt popcorn taste.
Sure.
And when was the last time you smoked out of a plastic bag? In reference to the volcano. So I really started thinking about all these things, and my favorite form of combustion had been the bong. And I would always kind of see how there was this really cool ritual. When people would come over, they would bust out the bong, and people would tell stories. Sometimes the bongs would even have a name. And then you would just pass it around in a circle and have a great time. So I started, the wheel started turning in my head like, all right, if we can make the user experience better, if we could make the vapor more opaque so it looks thicker like the smoke, and then if we could solve the problem with the taste, then maybe my friends might convert to vaping. And initially when we started this company, and why I think it's really important for people to really do what they're passionate about, is when we started this company, we weren't thinking about a company that we could grow and scale. We were just thinking about what's the best vaporizer that I would want to use. And this was kind of what I liked, vaping and bongs. And ultimately, I mean, we had to do some market validation because obviously if you just build what you love, it might not sell. But once we started winning the Cannabis Cup Awards, here we go, that's when we started realizing, okay, it's not just me and my group of friends and my wife that's telling me this is the best thing. This might actually be the best thing.
Okay, so what time would you say that you officially entered the industry?
It was probably in 2009 when I made the mental switch that I was going to design the world's best vaporizer. But it wasn't until late 2012 where I made the mental switch like, okay, this could actually be something that supports my family.
I gotcha. And so now you are thinking about scaling. You have this initial product that you've been testing the market with and getting into the hands of influencers and all that. Where do you go next? Like, what is the scalability of Vapex?
Yeah, very good salient question. So we released this in November of 2013. So at that point, vape pens, portable vapes were all very popular, and tons of people had them. So a lot of people asked us, why did we design a desktop vaporizer as our first vaporizer? And the truth of it is there's two different design philosophies. One of them is you design for the most revenue. And then the other is you just design the best stuff possible. And if you kind of put yourself into the context of if you're designing something for profit, well, you're going to look at certain materials and decide whether or not the cost benefit is high enough. So I always believe that if you design products based on profit, you're always going to have a neutered design in one way or another because there's other things to think about. Now, if we kind of take that example and go to the portables, with the portables, they had certain limitations. They had to fit in your pocket. It had to not get so hot that it would be too hot for your pocket. And it had to have enough battery life. So a lot of the designers that designed portables from the get-go, they had these limitations that they had to work within. Now for us, with the desktop unit, we could plug it in. It could be as big or as small as you like. So we had less restrictions, so we could really understand how we could take air, apply heat to the air, and then take that heated air and sublimate the herb or the vapor, or the herb or the oil. And if you look at technology in general, technology gets cheaper, it gets smaller, it gets more affordable. And, I don't want to mention any of our competitors, but if you look at our competitors' second and third offerings, they're typically just smaller versions of the previous device with longer battery life, and the user experience is more or less the same. We went through the process of let's solve the user experience first, And then just by the way the world works, technology will make it smaller, more affordable, and more accessible. So,
it also it forced you to kind of really focus on a particular client or a particular customer. So let's talk about like your initial customers.
Yes.
And the people who we all know have like become your evangelists. What did that do for your product development, and how did that help you kind of focus on creating the best product that you could?
Yeah, so I guess just to rewind a little, before creating this product, since I'm not an engineer by background, we actually started a thread on a very popular vape forum called, I'm almost embarrassed to say, but it's called fuckcombustion.com.
Interesting.
Yes.
I've never been there.
So within the first year, I just mentioned I want to create the world's best vaporizer. And then we had it was the most popular thread on that forum. We had over 1 million views our first year. And it was just people contributing their ideas of what would make the best vaporizer. And I combined that with my years of purchasing vaporizers and just kind of combined all the notes together to build this device. So I like to say that, it was kind of like crowdsourced in a way, some of the cool ideas and the configurations of this device. And ultimately, I mean, if it was just myself, I don't know if I would have built a device like this. I like to think of it was the collective brainchild of like the hardcore vapor nerds online.
Well, that's super interesting, because a lot of times when we're working with early startups, it's like, where are you going to get your first customers from? Where do they hang out, and where do they talk, and where can you interact with them?
Yes.
And a lot of people haven't even figured out that step yet. It's like, oh, we'll do Facebook ads. I'm like, are those the most effective for you? Or is going into fuckcombustion.com and having an actual conversation with people more effective for finding your customers?
Yeah, well, I think, depending on what you're trying to do, there could be multiple paths. But for us during that time, the industry wasn't as mature as it is today, so we could only rely on the counterculture at that time. Yeah. But, the great news is the counterculture seems very welcoming for the new, I call them the cannabis curious. And then what we're noticing is the cannabis curious is open to cannabis, but they don't seem to want to associate as much with the counterculture. Yeah. So we've actually do roughly 85% of our business direct. So we do survey a lot of our customers, and roughly 60% of them are from the counterculture, 40% are from the new industry, and really getting their feedback is what we're utilizing to create the roadmap of our future products, so that we're not just kind of feeling around in the dark, but we're actually going off of data of existing customers or potential customers and figuring out what they want.
Yeah, the data centricity is so important. I think we were just talking about it last week. Okay, so typically, hardware earns its reputation of being hard.
Yes.
Not only from a standpoint of delivering product and getting it into people's hands, but raising capital and all that. Break that open a little bit for us. What's been your experience as your first? Well, I mean, it's your first hardware product.
Yes.
You were in software before, software sales to be exact.
Correct.
But now you're doing a hardware product. You have raised capital and have just kind of continued to build your company. Talk about that experience a little bit.
So I'm not going to lie, raising capital for hardware has been difficult. I take a little solace in when I speak with other hardware manufacturers that, it's kind of par for the course. There's a lot of other investments in this industry where you could see a much faster ROI with less risk. So, I'm not going to lie, it's been very difficult, but this is why we go out and try to win all these awards to validate what we're doing. It shows that there's market validation. And ultimately, for me, it's been one of those things where I really had to do many gut checks. Like I always say, raising capital is calling up someone you don't know and asking for money, basically, right? So, what I found that's been really helpful is that, and I hate to say this, but I learned a little bit of this from Trump, is that, a little bit of bravado, a little bit of sensationalizing what you do, it goes a long ways. I used to think that investors were just these really cut and dry, data-oriented folks that, were not prone to any of these emotional swings that us normal peons are accustomed to. But what I found is, just beating my chest a little bit harder, being very non-Asian about what we're doing has helped tremendously. And that was kind of eye-opening because, like I said, investors don't get into their position by just, going through life willy-nilly. They probably, looked at a lot of data, made great decisions based on that data, and they got themselves into the position of being an investor. Mm-hmm. So I assumed when they were looking at opportunities, they would have that same type of outlook, and I think they do, but they also need to get excited.
Yeah.
And that was a part that I definitely completely eschewed, even though it's probably more in my wheelhouse to get excited.
Well, just to break that open a little bit, and as someone who makes investments and kind of evaluating what other successful investors are doing, and more often than not, it's just about getting excited about someone that you're confident can excite an entire community around a product, right?
Yes.
It's that, do they have the entrepreneurial DNA that we're often asking ourselves? That's kind of the first filter, and then we get into the numbers and analysis and all that kind of stuff. But do you believe in someone? I mean, a lot of times you'll hear investors say, I don't care if this company fails, I'll write them a check on the next company that they do.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing, and and I think this goes back to what I always like to preach, which is very important, is just be yourself. Yep. When I was trying to act like this very kind of even keel, not try to get too excited or too down, just kind of talk about it matter of factly, that's not me. I'm a guy that gets excited. I get passionate about stuff, and once I kind of realized that and just started being myself, then our close rate has exponentially gone up, and it's been awesome. It's been awesome, and ultimately, like I said, I kind of kicked myself, why was I trying to act like someone else? The best way is to be yourself and to present it as pure and as close to your heart as possible, because ultimately, if you are putting on a facade and the investor says yes, it's almost like when you go on a date.
Keep that facade up for a long time.
Exactly. So
well, I mean, that's the dichotomy of a founder, right? You do have to kind of stay even keeled throughout the day based on the ups and downs of your company, but you do want to wear your passion on your sleeve for your product so that you can invigorate people and be polarizing when you need to be, just so that people will remember you. Right?
Yeah.
Great. So, I mean, you're talking about things being hard. It's hard to imagine, just because, I mean, I don't know. I see you in social media. You got incredible friends. You've tapped into this athletic community, probably because your own experiences in helping cure pain for people. Tell me how that these are influencers that you've brought in, into your circle. How has that helped your business?
Yeah, and I think, not to beat a dead horse, but it goes back to just being your authentic self.
Yeah.
And it's not like we had a push for trying to meet athletes. Mm-hmm. It's that by talking about myself, how I use cannabis, how it's benefited me, we've attracted these athletes. All the athletes that you see on our social media, we don't pay any of them a penny. They all do it because they believe in the vision, they believe in what we're trying to do, and they also know that this is the best way to deliver cannabinoids, not only in a healthy way, but a way that's enjoyable for you to use. And I think that, at least for me, once I figured out just being Sabo was good enough. I don't need to be a Bezos. I don't need to be a Steve Jobs. I don't need to be any of these guys that we looked up to.
Sure.
Just figuring out how you are and presenting yourself, you're going to attract the right people. Mm-hmm. And maybe if it doesn't work out on your first venture, you learn some stuff. And then your second venture, you may tidy it up a little. But for me right now, I'm finding that just being myself, talking about things honestly, being my authentic self, it seems to be bringing a lot of really good things, not just professionally, but personally into my life as well.
Sure. Let's dig into just a little bit of kind of the platform that you came from, just because I've seen a lot of talent come out of it. Yammer.
Yes.
What do you think it was about the Yammer team that has produced, just strong executors? The founders of Ease, Zenefits, the CEO of Zenefits.
Yep.
Was there something magical about that team, or is it just coincidence that these top performers are coming out?
I think if you look at who started Yammer and then you see his background, so David Sachs, who's now the CEO of Zenefits, he was also one of the original founding members of the PayPal Mafia.
Right.
And to me, the PayPal Mafia, if you look at what each member has done after that, I think they might be the most impressive group of
Hands down, I think
Yeah,
that's pretty
yeah.
easy to say. Yeah.
So I do believe it's just kind of like that lineage. It's like A players attract A players. I also remember at Yammer, they gave a $15,000 bounty for any recommendations, or basically everyone was a headhunter. Many of us sales guys, myself included, I became a Ruby on Rails engineer recruiter. You know, I was like, if I find 2 of these guys a month, that's an extra 30 G's, you know?
Wow,
So,
yeah.
and I believe that by just kind of dipping into your network and looking for these folks, if you have A players, they typically like to hang around with other A players. And I really think, you know, that's something that we've been trying to adopt at this company, which is we almost never hire people that we don't know. They're always referrals or someone that's worked with someone else, so that we have an idea when they come on board that, you know, they don't just interview well, but they actually execute well too. And I think Yammer did a really good job of that. And we have a Yammer alumni group. I think it's up to like 30 of them have started their own individual companies now.
That's
some in the tech space, some in the green space. Yep. So I think it was one of the most motivating times or workplaces I've been at. But at that time, I was 32 years old. I was the oldest guy on our floor. You know, that was the weirdest thing. I was like, wow, this place is like kind of like Lord of the Flies. You know, I'm the oldest guy here. I got called grandpa once, and it really just shook me to the core, to tell you the truth. But
especially being an Asian man, you got the young-looking genes.
Exactly,
That's just not That's great. So hiring A players, you know, I kind of just want to start digging into just some of your core advice. Like being an entrepreneur, like what's the number one advice that you would give a new founder? You know,
so
if you need some time to think about it.
No,
you know?
okay. So I don't want to keep going back to my being your authentic self, but you know, I think it's really important for people to find out who they are. You know, some people do it through meditation, some people go through spiritual retreats, some people take, you know, crazy psychedelics. But I do believe that knowing yourself is super important, because if you don't know who you are, your true self, and you don't understand your strengths and weaknesses, it's going to be hard to surround yourself with the right team. So one of the exercises that I think is really great is that if you could ask a handful of your friends, really close friends, and give them a safe space to tell you what your 5 best strengths are and your 5 worst weaknesses are. And I guarantee you, you're going to be shocked. Some of the things that you think are your strengths are actually your weaknesses.
That's the old 360 review type thing,
right? I mean, I think that was one of the most important things for me to go through as an adult, which was, and one of the things that I'll share is, I thought that I was a great listener because I was a good conversationalist. And through asking my friends, I realized that I was a horrible listener. They just said I was waiting for my turn to talk, you know? And had I not gone through that exercise, I think I would have just, you know, like give people ear beatings all the time, and never listen to what they're saying. And now that I listen better, I mean, this was 10 years ago or so, but ever since I started implementing, like, all right, I'm not just waiting for my turn to speak, but actually engage in a conversation. It's like you just get so much more out of it. And I believe that a lot of entrepreneurs, they feel like they're good at everything and that they have trouble like relinquishing control to others. You know, that's a great exercise to start realizing like how other people really view you.
Self-awareness, super important. It's very high on our list as well.
And I think I heard Gary Vaynerchuk mention that in one of his videos too, as an important exercise to gain self-awareness.
Totally. Okay, so let's dig down now for cannabis entrepreneurs. You've been in it, like, you know, like we said, 2012?
Yes.
So 5 years now, which is longer than most.
Correct.
What have you learned about the cannabis industry? How has it evolved? Like, advice for people entering the industry?
Yeah, so if you're
we know being your authentic self is important.
Being your authentic self, that's important. No, okay, so...
But it is, because I always say how like relationship driven this industry still is. And people can weed out authenticity pretty quickly. Yeah.
I mean, I know for myself, when people present me business opportunities or want to partner and they don't have a tight relationship with the plant, like a lot of their credibility goes out the window. So for me, and this isn't specific to cannabis, but every industry, you should be a subject matter expert. You know, you shouldn't have a friend be able to out-talk you in this subject. Totally. You know, you should be, even if you have super stoner friends, you should know more than all of them. Also is, Man, I feel like every year is almost like a dog year in this industry. So much changes. You need to keep up with all the rules and regulations. It doesn't matter if you're an ancillary product or if you're touching the plant.
Yeah.
You need to be up to speed on all of that. That's been a difficult thing for myself to just do all this reading, as well as raise capital, as well as run the company, and it does get challenging, but I think, not to say this is specific to the cannabis industry, but I do think that you need to have a higher or a thicker skin, higher tolerance for, I don't want to say bullshit, but there is a lot of BS going on. There's a lot of snake oil salesmen. There's a lot of growers that have this proprietary grow technique, extractors that have the best extraction technique,
the
and then
cleanest weed.
and then you just find out they're doing what Jorge Cervantes told them to do in the Cannabis Bible or whatever.
Sure.
So that for someone like me who's like really social and likes people, I've had to almost become a pessimist, so that I didn't get swindled into doing all of these projects with these people that are over-promising and under-delivering. So for me, jumping from high tech to the cannabis industry, I was very much used to just telling people to do something and then just knowing that it'll be executed. In this space, I found myself becoming much more of a micromanager, not within my company, but
partners,
with other people's companies, and that's been, if you're not ready to do some of those things, or if you're not ready to deal with industry that's not fully mature yet, then you might have a really tough go. And I have been going to a bunch of trade shows. I know you have been too. And I see how much turnover there is. And my hypothesis is everyone thinks it's easy to make money in the cannabis industry. And it's not, and if you don't love it, you're going to quit, So I guess first and foremost is you got to have a really tight relationship.
So we often talk about the why. You need to have a why for your product, for the company that you're building, but not only that, you need to have a why for being in this industry.
I think so. I know not everyone is fortunate enough to work in some industry that they're passionate in, but I would never train jiu-jitsu from a guy that was a boxing coach.
Sure.
I want my jiu-jitsu coach to be almost imbalanced in how much he loves jiu-jitsu, and I like to think I'm well-rounded, but my one hobby from 97 till now, the one that everyone could point to, even more so than video games, which was my previous hobby, was vaporizers. I'm like singularly focused on this one thing to deliver, cannabinoids in the healthiest, funnest way. And back to what we were saying, this industry is difficult. I don't know where people get the idea that it's easy money, but if you don't love it,
we just make it look so easy, Sabo.
Well,
that's the trick. Okay, so I just want to kind of tie a bow on like this whole like owning the domain. It's clear that you have knowledge of the vaporizer space, that you love the plant. Like, how do you stay up on it? Like, how do you pick and choose where you spend your time? Because we know we're resource constrained. What are like the top conferences that are a must for you? The top, publications, podcasts, blogs, whatever it is that you use to stay up on the industry.
Oh man, what a great question. So,
besides the Gateway Open Office.
Yeah, Gateway Open Office Hours, obviously top of the list. I mean, if you guys aren't watching this every week, you guys are missing out. But in addition to,
you heard it here.
yeah, absolutely. Especially this week, there's awesome knowledge bombs being dropped.
It's huge. Production quality is an all-time high.
I like Medical Jane. I like Hello MD. I've signed up and subscribed to pretty much every newsletter, so I'm inundated with a lot of stuff. I think New Frontier Data has a good one, Viridian Capital. I like to hang out where the young kids hang out too, so I sometimes get on Instagram and Snapchat and look at what they're into.
Yeah.
But
any particular influencers that you like?
We always like Coral Reefer. She's local.
Yeah.
She's well spoken, and I think. She's been doing this far before there was an industry, so she has a good grasp of like the before and after. But one of the things that, and this might be answering a previous question, is kind of dealing with this transition of the counterculture into this new age. That's been one of the most challenging yet interesting things, and I think if you have a natural interest in the plant, like you will just try to consume as much data about it as possible.
Yep.
You know, like I'm not really tracking where I read about things. You know, I'm just, anytime I see cannabis or marijuana, you know, I'll spend a few minutes and read that article. And then as far as like prioritizing my time for conferences and things like that, I mean, that is one of the toughest things. And, you know, I think another great lesson to teach entrepreneurs is that you could be busy 24/7 and not still be doing the right things. 100%. You know, and, you know, whether it's like, I find a lot of entrepreneurs spending time on what's my perfect messaging, or should my logo have fuchsia or orange? And I'm like, dude, you guys got to sell some shit, you know, like this, like coloring stuff, like
that's a quotable right there, Michael.
Yeah, it's all fun and easy, right? And I found the reason I could talk about this is, you know, I found myself doing similar things, which was, you know, like I said, no one wants to call up a stranger and ask for money, right? But every company needs to raise money, and I found myself kind of deprioritizing, you know, like reaching out to, or especially cold calling investors. If I had warm intros, and obviously be all over it, but you know, I could start seeing that just in general, people tend to deprioritize the stuff that they don't like to do, and many times it's the important stuff. Yeah. So for myself, when I look at the conferences, the first thing I do is I look at who is sponsoring, what companies are involved, who's speaking, and then I look to see if any of the speakers or any of the vendors could be a strategic partner for Vape Exhale. If there are people there, then I'll go. If there aren't, and it's just a chance for me to hear myself talk on a panel with no connections made, then I'm not going to do something like that, you know?
That's very important. Be strategic about conferences. Like, conferences have to have a strategy. It's just not networking. And when you're determining whether, you know, anyone could go, it's like, oh, I'm going to find partners and stuff. Well, you have to be targeted with that as well. Is it essential with the next steps of your company, right?
Yeah.
That's great. That's all the business stuff I want to talk about.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sure everyone knows who Steve D'Angelo is. So Steve D'Angelo, if you don't know, he's the founder of Harborside. He has two really long braided ponytails.
Got a nice hat.
Yeah, and he kind of looks like, you know, a well-dressed businessman hippie, you know, but kind of like, you know, he kind of comes off as someone that, you know, like if a businessman came up to him, would resonate with them. And then if he spoke to like a young stoner, like they wouldn't feel like he was too much of a, you know, different than them. And one of the things that I asked Steve was, you know, I was like, did you deliberately pick out your outfit today, you know? And then he was like, everything I do is deliberate, you know? And it really got me thinking, because the way he carries himself, he's kind of like, I mean, this is my impression, you know, he's just a guy that like, he's going along with his life. He loves cannabis. He's a huge proponent, but he seems like relaxed and, you know, maybe not a guy that's like strategically planning all this stuff, right?
But he is.
But he is, exactly.
He definitely
is. So I'm not saying like be a phony, you know, I'm just saying that you have to be strategic, you know, like you want to be your authentic self, obviously, but if your authentic self turns people off, then maybe not, you know. So yeah, but what Steve told me, that really hit a chord with me, because this goes back to what we were just talking about thinking things through, why you're doing them, you know, whether or not that strategy is correct or not. You should have a strategy. You just shouldn't show up every day and expect something good to happen.
Great. That was fantastic. Okay. I want to break into the Canadads, because it is a club that I recently have had the privilege of joining.
Hell yeah.
I'm very proud to represent the industry, be a positive light, you know, and show that I can be a good father and be associated with this. Tell me about the inspiration for starting Canadads, you know, where it is and where it's going.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started Vape Exhale, I couldn't think of anything more exciting than Vape Exhale. Then I had a kid, and that was like a million times more exciting, right? So I was kind of like, wow, you know, there's like this next level to life that doesn't revolve around profit, revenue, and scaling. It involves like scaling a human, you know, and
the next greatest startup.
Correct. And I love challenges. Startups are very, very challenging. And I would say kids are like startups on steroids, you know.
And then doing kids while running a startup
Yeah, you might be a masochist, I think.
Yes.
But so obviously being a dad is very important to me. Also being a husband is very important to me. But I really feel like, especially, I don't know if it's just the cannabis industry, but like canna moms, canna parents, like it's very like maternally focused. And I believe that this generation of children, you know, we need both strong maternal and paternal influence, you know, and I believe that if a kid, you know, really has both of those things, you know, they have more advantages to succeed in life, you know, and I really think like my dad, not that he's proud of this, but, you know, he was like, I never changed a diaper before. And I was like, no wonder when you're with my kids, you're like just
a robot.
Yeah, like almost just level 1, white belt. And I always just thought like, you know, I remember my dad always going off on business trips and saying, I'm doing this for the family, right? And I was like, well, I would love it if you did it for the family and you were also around, you know? So that always kind of stuck with me. And, you know, I just wanted to not only give dads like a safe space to come out and talk about being a dad, but also we're kind of going through a transition where half the country already has access to either medical or recreational. At some point, we're going to have that discussion with our kids. Like, yeah, we used to say cannabis was bad. Now it's good. You know, how do we deal with that transition? And ultimately, I don't have the answers, but I think having a safe space for people to gather and also a place where you could be proud to be a dad, you know, there's multiple reasons why we started it and multiple reasons why it's important to me.
Well, let's talk about the nexus of, you know, cannabis and actually parenting and school and that kind of stuff. How, you know, what have the interactions with other parents been like? You know, do you participate with the PTA? Like how far does it go, and what are kind of some of the friction points that you've encountered?
Oh man, you're giving me these softballs to answer. This is awesome. So a year ago, I was actually the president of the PTA.
Get out.
Yes. Prior to that, okay, so just to rewind the story, when my daughter was still in preschool, she had a friend that no longer does play dates with her because her parents found out I was in the cannabis industry. My wife was, as you can imagine, you know, not very happy about it. So she said, hey, you know, before our daughter starts kindergarten, just make sure everyone likes you before you tell them what you do. Then, you know, there's a higher likelihood that they'll remain friends. And as I'm walking my daughter to school, I'm like hearing my wife's voice in my head. And then I'm hearing Steve D'Angelo's voice in my head too, talking about stoner shame, which was, you know, are you shameful to be a stoner? And I started really thinking, this is a medicine that I believe in. There's nothing to be shameful about. I'm going to tell everybody what I do. And ultimately,
Meanwhile, your wife's voice is like, slow down, say well.
Yeah. So just fast forward, you know, I became president of the PTA. Half the parents in the class are Vape Exhale customers.
There you go.
The teacher is dating an individual by the name of Scott Chu, who's general partner at Gabriel Ventures, who only looks into hardware and tech. Now they're going to look into the cannabis space. So there have just been tons of great things that have come from being open about my cannabis use. And, you know, there have been some people that were negative about cannabis, and I didn't make them positive, but I think I got them to neutral, where they were like, well, if someone wants to do that in their free time, they could do whatever they want. And I think it's super important that anytime you have an opportunity to come out of the closet and educate people, that you do, because people, I think, when people are receiving messages, they're more receptive to people that kind of look like them. You know, so, you know, I get asked to speak in front of like a lot of Asians that are opposing dispensaries being opened in their neighborhoods. But this is why I think anybody that's involved in the cannabis space, you got to speak up. If you hear someone saying some things that are incorrect, even if it's just minor stuff, you should correct them, because it's an opportunity to educate. And if you do kind of, you know, if you look like Ben and you have a collared shirt and wearing a blazer and you got glasses, you know, some people might be much more receptive to you telling them about cannabis than, you know, a guy with a tattoo on his head, right?
Yeah. Fantastic. I've loved this conversation. I want to loop in the others in the room and online if there are any. Chris, Princessa, you guys bring them on.
We have a few questions on Facebook.
Okay.
Kaliko is admiring the hardware that you bought with you.
Oh, yes.
And Eric wants to know who is a founder from a different industry that you might emulate or maybe respect?
That's a very good question. So one of the founders in another industry, and his name is escaping me, but he's the founder of GoPro. The reason why I really like that individual, and the fact that I don't know his name is like super embarrassing right now. But the reason why I like him is that when he introduced the GoPro, you know, Sony, Canon, Nikon, they all could have come out with their own action sports camera. They had the technology. It would have been easy for them. But the reason why GoPro did so well was that this individual, he was his authentic self. So a lot of the early stuff was just him surfing. It was him going to community events and being part of the community and being active in the community. And that is how GoPro was able to leapfrog over all these other camera companies that could have come out with action cameras. And, you know, it was one of those things that when I learned of his story, and they're just over in Half Moon Bay, you know, it just really made me feel passionate about sticking to my guns, not trying to, you know, come out with a product that would appeal to everyone, but to, you know, really just focus on what we do well and do more of that, and then try to be authentic about it, and then trying to grow the business based on that. And, you know, we are obviously nowhere as big as GoPro, but, you know, we don't spend any more than a few $100 a month on advertising ever. You know, all of it has been word of mouth. And I really think that being a part of the community and being active, you know, has given us that ability to, you know, just ask individuals like Eugene Monroe or Kyle Turley or Steve D'Angelo, will you do a 30-second video clip for us? And they almost always say yes.
That's amazing. Great.
And then Michael would like to know if you've thought about expanding beyond vaping into other opportunities that would benefit athletes in cannabis.
That's also another great question. So yes, beyond delivering cannabinoids through a vaporization system, you know, we've looked at numerous different ways, whether it's topical, tinctures, lozenges. You know, there's tons of different ways. We just kind of focused on vaporization initially because it has the fastest rate of absorption. But we definitely want to move into these other areas where athletes could benefit from other types of cannabinoid delivery systems.
Sure.
And then a question for the both of you. As dads, what are you most excited to share with your kids about your role in the cannabis industry?
How about you?
You know, I often reflect on how I admire the people that jumped in early with the tech industry and how, like, I missed that boat, right? Like, I didn't get in the tech industry until late in the 2000s. This is my chance to be at the forefront of the future, right? Like, we are on the right side of history. We're pushing forward something that is going to be even more impactful than tech. It's going to improve lives, and it's going to open up people's minds. Like you mentioned earlier, like, it's a gateway to the truth, and kind of like a realization about like our built environment. And so cannabis has done a lot to open up my mind, and I do find that when I get out and connect with people and talk to them, that I have an opportunity to kind of build a new reality for them. And that, you know, 10, 15 years down the road, when we look back at this time, we'll be like, you know, that was amazing. We started this whole new reality that we all are going to exist in.
Yeah. Oh, I love that answer. And for me, you know, I kind of think of this new industry as like another paradigm shift of human consciousness. You know, we had one in the 60s with the hippie movement, but I believe that without the internet to connect all these disparate groups, you know, like they were able to kill that movement. And I do believe that with cannabis gaining more legality across the states, you know, we are seeing kind of like a shift in public consciousness. But what I would tell my daughter is that, you know, I remember my dad when I was younger, he used to say, do what you love. And I was like, but Dad, you don't do what you love. Right? So I was like,
I'm doing it for the family.
Yeah. So, you know, for me, you know, this is really an example that I could tell my daughter, like, you know, follow your heart, follow your passion. There will be some people maybe even me, that tells you this is a bad idea. But if you feel really strongly and you think you can make a positive impact, go do it. Daddy did it, and Daddy was part of this, really cool movement that really helped society become more woke, you know? And to me, that's the best feeling, to be able to tell my daughter these types of things without feeling like a hypocrite.
Well, that's opening up Pandora's box.
And then we have one more. How has your martial arts background influenced your practices and your approach as a founder?
What's interesting is I definitely still encounter some situations where I'll be intimidated. But when I speak with younger entrepreneurs, whether it's like speaking with a potential big customer or maybe like an important investor, they'll all be like, "Oh man, I'm so nervous. What should I do?" And for me, I'm just like, why are you nervous? Like, the only thing that makes me nervous is when someone's about to choke me out, If no one's choking me out, it's not a life and death situation. I can handle it, and that is, I don't
mean to... Pain will subside shortly.
I don't mean to sensationalize it, but that is the truth, we had some really big fires to put out 2 weeks ago. And, not that I'm bragging about this, but my wife was like, shouldn't you be more concerned? And I was like, I should be, but that's not going to help the situation. We've already done everything that we could to resolve this problem. Me being anxious or more concerned doesn't speed up or slow this down. So, and a lot of it, when I go back to my jiu-jitsu or martial arts training, it's like, unless I'm being knocked out or choked out, it's all part of the process and nothing to be like overly concerned about. And, I've really tried to apply that to the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur, which is until you're bankrupt, that's just yet another problem in the endless amount of problems that you're going to have to deal with. And I think that martial arts in particular is 99% of the time you're in pain. 1% of the time you're rejoicing. And I kind of think entrepreneurship is kind of like that, where a lot of it is you're just struggling, but then that day or that week when you're experiencing joy, it's like a joy that, no one else or no other drug could really facilitate. I know
reminds me of like living in San Francisco in weather.
Yes.
Any questions from the live audience? We can answer the comment section online anytime. I want to make sure we get to your guys' question. We have about 8 minutes left before we have to cut things off.
Well, thank you so much for including us. I guess you were mentioning earlier about reaching out or cold calling investors, possible investors. I just wanted to ask how you approach that. What are some of the things that you want to make sure before you approach or cold call an investor, and just how you would execute that?
Yeah, super great question. And, I wouldn't say this just applies to cold calling investors, but cold calling people in general. So what I typically like to do is I go on LinkedIn, I find out who that person is or whoever the decision maker is, and then I look at their history, like where do they work? Sometimes they list some of their interests, if it's family, if it's skateboarding, whatever. I start getting a really good idea of who this person is and potentially what their pain points may be. So instead of sending out an email to like 100 people, I sit down and I send out maybe just 5 or 6, but they're really targeted, detailed emails. So like if it was Ben Larson, for example, I'd probably go on Facebook, LinkedIn, I'd check his Twitter, especially if I found out he had a kid recently, I might put in the subject line like congratulations, do something that shows that it's not just another templated email, and I typically like to put something specific in there. For example, when I was selling software, which is, I read in your S1, you guys are going through something like this. Our software can solve a challenge like that. So automatically it makes you a subject matter expert and gives you credibility. And with investors, it's the same thing. I think Ben brought up a really great point, which was they want to invest in the person. So if you're just sending out like a form email to 100 people, well, they're like, well, this guy, he's probably not attentive to detail, or he's just, trying to do as little work for maximum impact. We want guys that are attentive to detail, that will do the extra work if it means that it'll get them to their goal quicker. And I believe, doing your homework before reaching out. But to more specifically answer your question, cold calling investors, cold emailing them, usually not that successful. Like I would find, someone like Ben or someone else that has a warm connection to them and ask for an intro. That is always better. But if you don't have that, then I would do the research.
And can I add just one very small tactical thing? We know you're going to copy and paste some text into your email. After you prepare the email, just highlight everything and remove formatting, because the different fonts and different text size, it's like a dead giveaway, and it's just like automatically archived. It's just like, I don't want a template email.
I love that. And one thing that people might not realize is if you cut and paste in Gmail and you don't make any changes and the format and the color is the same, Gmail will still highlight the cut and pasted area as purple. Sure. So just add a period and it'll make it all black.
So I wonder, you spoke about market validation, and I wonder what you did to actually, test the market prior to getting your vapor online.
Yeah, there's this book by Bo Peabody called Lucky or Smart, and this was definitely one of those situations where we were more lucky than smart. And we were able to get a lot of market validation through the actual kind of design process, with people participating with some of the various components that went into the vaporizer. But when we actually started the company, using a crowdfunding site called Indiegogo, and essentially we were just selling pre-orders. So basically each pre-order was kind of like validating that we were on the right track, and then we tripled our goal. Our goal was only 50,000, but during that time, for a cannabis company in early 2013, that was a pretty big chunk of change on a crowdfunding campaign. And we've been doing kind of continual market validation by just surveying our existing customers. And we actually, as with most vaporizer companies, we started off using distributors like Vape World, Vapor Nation, but what we started realizing was by utilizing a distributor, we're one more we're insulated away from the end customer. So by taking it direct, it just allowed us to interact with the customer and really kind of have a pulse of what's going on in the cannabis industry, not just based on what we're reading in the paper, but our actual customers.
Sure. Awesome. All right. Chris, anything? No? Sabo, thank you so much, man.
Yeah. Are we going to do some live dabs or?
Oh, man. I don't know. Are we going to?
Is that against FCC rules?
Let's see how this thing works.
Okay. Well,
in the meantime, I'll let Michael wrap up the show. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Join us next week. Who knows who will be here? Carter might be back. I don't know.
Mr. Carter.
Mr. Carter Ding. Yeah.
Mr. Ding. I like that.
Mr. Ding. There you go. All right. Until next week.
Next week.
Yeah. Take it easy and be proud. Be loud and
be proud. Be loud. Love each other. I'm not going to say be your authentic self, but just love each other.
We'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So yeah, how does this work?
So this is the vaporizer itself. It's the Vape XL Evo. This has the monkey heat shield on it. It was actually designed by some artists in Ibiza.
No kidding.
Yeah. They had done some crazy psychedelics and saw this monkey and said, we want to draw this monkey for you.
Okay.
So basically, well, you've used this before, but for those that haven't used it before, what you'll do is take your piece of concentrate.
Mm-hmm.
This is from Oakland Extracts, and you put it just right into this glass vial.
Look at that. It looks like a cookie.
Yes.
You guys could come up here if you want to
Princessa,
check
you
this
can
out.
I like it. I always say this is like the Nilla wafer.
Yeah, just don't eat it.
Yeah. So once it's in here, instead of dabbing on a hot surface, which is like grilling or frying, we throw it into this all-glass heater core. So the hot air melts it down, and if you think about, char marks on a steak, those taste pretty good, but when you have some really good concentrates, well, you want it to taste like it should. So once we see some vapor rising, we could cover it with our mouthpiece, and then just inhale till it's done.
Pretty simple. Oh my goodness.
It's beautiful.
And then I forgot to put water, but it's still smooth enough without water.
Wow.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Would you like to? Anyone would like to try it?
A little early in the morning for me.
Okay. Well, this is a very special strain, the Sacred Sour, which is it's a nice sativa dominant strain that isn't too heavy, but I'm not.
All right, put a little bit of there.
Oh yes, Carter. I mean Ben.
We'll get Carter next time. Mr. Ding.
Ice cream from Benny Carter.
All right.
New dads could vape anytime they want. You have
yeah,
high stress
I have no
levels.
idea what time of day it is anymore. It's
There is no time of day.
is
It's
it,
always
is it
baby
3 in
time.
the morning? Is it 6 in the
It's
morning?
always baby time.
New father.
That's-
It smells really good.
You know what they don't tell you about raising a child is that whether they're sleeping or not, you have to wake them up every 2 or 3 hours. And I'm like, that is masochistic. I mean, like the baby,
I didn't wake mine.
because you have to feed them every 3 hours, and so it's like.
Only if they woke up.
Yeah, we didn't do that. We're like, if the kid's sleeping,
leave that sucker alone.
we'll take the
Well,
extra.
yeah, like even my mom, she was like, "Yeah, you slept through the night of the first night home," and like I was like, "Oh, hopefully our baby will do that." And then we're leaving the hospital, like, now remember, wake them up every 3 hours to feed them. I'm like, what?
Well, your son's less than a month old, right?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So I think that first month they're really trying to make sure they gain weight.
Yes.
I'm gonna take a baby hit just because I
Nice.
do have to
I'll take that.
be a photographer. I don't know how these things work.
That was a half a hit.
That's a very smooth experience.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
That was awesome.
All right.
Back to work, huh?
Back to work.
Back to
Yeah.
work.